Time's up. How long was that? 30 seconds. Did it seem like 30 seconds? Or did it seem a lot longer than 30 seconds? Because when you're sitting there and you're silent and you're looking up here and there's not much to look at, why did it do that? I love technology. I hate technology. But that 30 seconds seems like a long time, doesn't it? It seems like a long time when you're sitting there and you just got to be quiet. And you know the other time that 30 seconds seems so long is when you pray. It just seems like it is forever. So when somebody says, hey, let's pray for an hour, you're chomping at the bit to say no. Because it just seems like such a long time. 30 seconds. Back in February this past year, there was this little event on TV that was called the Super Bowl. You remember the Super Bowl? Do you know what corporations paid for 30 seconds of time during the Super Bowl? $7 million for 30 seconds. I don't think I'd get anybody here to give me $1 for that 30 seconds I took out of your life, would you? But that's what it is. 30 seconds. They believe that those 30 seconds, at that moment in time, is very much worth what they're paying. But I want to tell you this morning, and I want you to understand, there is a moment in time that is worth a lot more than $7 million. You want to guess what season we're in? Isn't it beautiful? Thanks to all those who took time last Sunday and Monday to put all this together for us so that we can enjoy it. Now, when we announce that we're going to take it all down, be prepared to hang around, right? Because we'll need help doing that. But it's Christmas season. And in this series, we want to very much just help all of us to rediscover the wonder of Christmas. The wonder of a small child. And so today what we're beginning with is a wonder of the moment. A wonder of the moment. Have you ever taken time to understand the wonder of the timing of Jesus' birth? Galatians, Paul's the writer there, and he tells us in Galatians 4:4 and 5, he says, but when the right time came, I want you to hear that, but when the right time came, God sent his son. Born of a woman subject to the law, God sent him to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. It is the Christmas season again, already. And we need to understand that there is a specific time that Jesus came. I like the old King James says, when in the fullness of time was come. At just the right moment, Jesus came into this world. Jesus came at the right time. Now, at the time of his birth, 2,000 years ago or so, most people didn't recognize the significance of it, right? People were too busy. Sound familiar today? People just too busy to really think about what Christmas is, aren't they? But back that day, they were too busy to think about the fact that there was a little girl giving birth to her first child in a barn in Bethlehem. But yet, even in the midst of that, Jesus came at just the right time. The coming of Christ into the world was not a matter of chance. It was not a matter of coincidence. His coming was a part of God's plan from the very beginning. Think about it from a historical point of view. We got to thank the Greek and the Romans because of the conquest that they had. You see, because at the time Jesus came, Latin and Greek were the languages that were known across the entire empire. So that made communication much simpler with all the people around the known world. The other thing about history, the Old Testament prophecies come true. They were done. And just the right time, God sent his son. So historically speaking, that was the right time. How about culturally? Well, culturally speaking, it was the right time as well, because in Jesus' life, Rome and Greece and Babylon or Persia, whatever you wish to call it, and Egypt were relatively peaceful. They've come to a peaceful time without any major hostilities. Think about that. That meant that travel was pretty easy. Wars were minimal, so that meant that they could put their money into culture, into philosophy and education. And the culture, one in particular, the Greek culture, spread across that region, ensuring that most people understood the common language. Even those who lived on the outskirts, like the Jews that lived out in Jerusalem, they were on the very outskirts of the Roman Empire. They were even familiar with the Greek language and the philosophy of the Greeks. Historically, culturally, and spiritually, it was the right time. The ineffectiveness of the Romans' gods was becoming more and more evident. The claustrophobic Roman rule kept Jews on the lookout for that Messiah, the one that had been prophesied. They kept looking for, because they were seeking something better in their lives. They were seeking something better than the state or state-ordained religions. Think about it. Even a Samaritan woman who was rejected by the Jews because of her nationality and her gender, she was awaiting the Messiah. That's what John tells us in John 4:25. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Now, I will be very transparent. I have no clue what the fullness of time means. But God did give us a few hints. And I think the most prominent hint is very simply that God didn't wait around until things looked right. After all, he'd seen all of human history. He predicted exactly when Jesus would come. So we need to understand that God works through human history. Jesus' arrival was not random. It was preordained and it was well prepared. He came at the exact time that he needed to. And that was to ensure that we'd understand and appreciate the message of Christmas. God with us. If God can orchestrate all of that for the exact moment that he wants his son to arrive in this world, then folks, I'm going to challenge you to say that we can surely trust God will take the same perfect timing in our lives. Now, I will be the first to admit, I don't always agree with God's timing. As a matter of fact, there are times that I hate God's timing. But his timing is always perfect. Listen, would you agree this morning? Would you agree that God, knowing what the cost was, would consider every angle in the planning, such as the operation. That he sent his son, the right man, for the mission, the only mission. And it was accomplished only one specific way, and that was Jesus' death and his resurrection. But yet, what was it about this vast Roman Empire that was so ideal for the coming of Jesus? Why, after hundreds of years or even thousands of years, did God decide this was the right time for Jesus to live on this earth? Why wasn't it earlier than this? Why wasn't it later than this? It was historically significant because of the Mediterranean world, the cradle of civilization. It was unified. I mentioned earlier there was peace. They could travel. And that was for the first time in 1,000 years that there were not wars going on in that area of the world. And the Romans, gotta love the Romans, because they're the ones who added these famous Roman roads. There are roads that Rome built that are better today than the ones that we have here in Indianapolis, I guarantee you. They created better ships. The apostles were able to spread the gospel because they could climb on a ship and go wherever they needed to. And there was peace in that area for over 200 years. When did the church grow fastest and most? In the first 70 years after Jesus. But there was 200 years that it was peaceful. Greek was the widely spoken, enabling Jesus to communicate with many individuals and groups in this relatively calm environment. And because it was calm, this is key, because it was calm, the Jews were permitted to keep their traditions and to keep their religion in Jerusalem. If you think about the earlier periods of time or the later periods of time, Jesus would have had a much more difficult time moving and speaking freely. Such practical concerns had to be overcome. There were still dangers and obstacles. Yes, we understand that. But this phrase of Roman supremacy best served God's purpose. 2020. We all remember that year, don't we? Yeah, 3 months worth of COVID for me. I remember that year. But there was something else that happened that year as I was laying in bed. Saturn and Jupiter lined up to create a huge light for those who enjoyed the clear skies, that is. And that's called a conjunction. And a conjunction occurs when two or more celestial bodies appear to meet in the night sky. And such an event like that can produce what appears to be an extremely large, particularly bright star visible. And it can be there for a week. It can be there for a month. So if the wise man were to follow the moment of the conjunction, it's possible they were led in that direction because of two planets that aligned in the sky that made or created the Star of Bethlehem. As a matter of fact, even more unusual, there was a triple conjunction event that actually occurred over span from September of 3 BC through May of 2 BC. That's according to scientist J. Ryan in his article, What Was the Star of Bethlehem? God had his hand in it. We sing about the star. We talk about the wise men. We talk about how they followed this star or that star. And we just accepted on faith that there was a bright star there. We got some proof as to why it was there. But God put it together. From the very beginning, God put it together. The Lord's plan to bring Jesus to earth was catalyzed at the beginning of time with the orbit of every planet and the placement of every body of light in the universe. You see, this verse declares that God, the Father, sent his Son when time had fully come. There were many things occurring at that time of the first century. At least from our reasoning as human beings, we can look back and use our 20/20 hindsight just a bit. Listen, here's some of the reasons that we think it was a good time. There was a great anticipation among the Jews that the Messiah was going to come. It would give a sense of unity to the various lands. The Roman rule over Israel made the Jews hungry for Jesus to come, for the Messiah to come. Another thing that we see from our human perspective is that Rome had unified much of the world under its government, giving a sense of unity to the various lands. And because the empire was relatively peaceful, travel was made simpler, allowing early Christians to spread the gospel. Such freedom to travel was impossible before or after this time. Now, while Rome had conquered most of the area militarily, the Greeks had conquered it culturally. The Greek language is the greatest description of that. Now, we're not talking about the classical Greek language. We're talking about the trade language that was spoken throughout the empire, which made it possible to communicate the gospel to many different people groups in one language. What's the greatest barrier to mission work today? Language. It's language. Just recently we had a group from Africa here at the church that wanted to use our facility, but we just couldn't work things out. I couldn't understand them. They couldn't understand me. Language was the greatest barrier. When Jesus was here 2,000 years ago, that was not a barrier because everyone spoke the same language, the trade Greek, if you will. You know, there was a fact that many false idols failed to give victory over the Roman conquerors. They were looking for a Messiah that would take the Roman conquerors away from them. And yet when they were worshiping these idols, nothing ever happened, nothing ever changed. And so, at the same time, in the more cultured cities, the Greek philosophy and science of the time, it just left people spiritually hungry. They were empty. Kind of the same way that atheism leaves people in the communist countries today. They're empty. They're void. They are looking to be filled. The mystery religions of the time emphasized a savior God that required worshipers to offer bloody sacrifices. You see what that did? That just made the gospel of Christ, which involved one ultimate sacrifice, believable to them. It wasn't some new concept. They already knew what the sacrifices were about, so it made it believable for them. And then lastly, the Roman army, they recruited outside of Rome. They recruited outside of what we call Italy. They recruited soldiers from various provinces all over. And what they did is they introduced these men to Roman culture and to the ideas, such as the gospel, that had not reached out into those areas or provinces yet. As a matter of fact, the earliest introduction of the gospel to Britain was a result of the efforts of Christian soldiers who were stationed there. At just the right time. The good news is that God comes to you and I at just the right time as well. He comes to us at the right time. He comes to us at the right moment. And he comes to us with what we need at that moment. When we need him most, he's there. Romans chapter 5, verse 6. For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. At the right time. He has promised to come at the right time and provide what we need. When we're totally helpless, he comes. The wonder of the moment. How significant was that moment? You know, there's still going to be a lot of people that miss the wonder of Christmas this year. Let me try to bring the wonder into your life for this season. The probability of fulfilling 48 of the over 300 prophecies, listen to this, they are 1 in a trillion to the 13th power. Did you hear that? They were 1 in a trillion with 13 zeros after it. That's how likely it is for 48 of those prophecies to be fulfilled, and there were 300 of them that were fulfilled. That is amazing. That should bring wonder to you. Are you going to miss the wonder of Christmas this year? Are you going to miss the wonder of Jesus? He still comes at the right time. Psalm 145:15 says, the eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. Psalm 104:27 says, all creatures look to you to give them their food at the proper time. And Deuteronomy 11:14 says, then he will send rain on your land at the right time, in the fall and in the spring. And you will be able to gather your grain, new wine, and oil. At just the right time, God provides exactly what we need. And here's the part that we need to hear. And none of us like this. God's timing is always right. God's timing is always right. I don't like it in here. I know it is true here. But I don't necessarily always like God's timing. But I know it is always right. Back to Romans 5:6. You see, just at the right time, we were still powerless. Christ died for the ungodly. So this morning, I'm just a couple simple questions. When do you need a miracle? When do you need a miracle? When's the right time for you? 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2 says, at the right time, I heard your prayers. On the day of salvation, I helped you. I tell you that the right time is now. And the day of salvation is now. One moment. 1 60-second span of time can make all the difference for eternity. What are you going to do with your moment this Christmas? Are you going to take time? Are you going to take time and allow the wonder of what took place 2,000 years ago? Are you going to allow that to sink in? The wonder of Christmas has so many aspects to it, and over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about those. But today we started with that which brought Jesus to this earth. That moment. Go back to the 30 seconds. Seem like an eternity when you're sitting there looking at something like this. I understand that. But in that 30-second time span, the moment could be the difference in eternity. Share your moments this Christmas. Share them with family, share them with friends, share them with coworkers. Any opportunity you get to share your moments, do it. That moment 2,000 years ago should still bring wonder and amazement to each and every one of us.